Hey guys, BuildZoid here, and welcome to HWbot Score Roundup number 22. It's super late, and I've decided to change the format a bit, because I've gotten sort of, I've decided that it's really boring to make a video discussing sort of the same hardware every single week. So new format is we're going to sort of run through a bunch of massive scores that have come out in the last week, in this case 2 weeks, and then we're going to move into more interesting hardware configurations that, we're going to, I'm going to talk about way more. So with that out of the way, let's get into it, starting off with Senz's SuperPi 32 million on 32 million world record at 3 minutes, 37 seconds, and 616 milliseconds, running on a 11900K at 7145 megahertz. SuperPi 32 million is a single-core, single-threaded, very memory-intensive benchmark, but it also, of course, loves CPU frequency because it's single-threaded. Running on an EVGA Z590 Dark, dual-rank Samsung B die, so, 2x32 gigs there, doing 4,080 megabits per second, 12, 12, 12, 16, 181 T command rate. That's actually really impressive that he has 1 T command rate working in dual rank, and that is Gear 1. On LN2, the 11th gen memory controller is a lot less awful than it is on ambient cooling. You can actually push Gear 1 to some halfway decent frequencies. So Senz now has the SuperPi 32 million world record. I think, I think this might be the first time in a very long time that an EVGA motherboard has held the SuperPi 32 million world record. So, yeah, congratulations to Senz on that score, and let's move on to the next score, which is Senz's 8-core Cinebench R20 top score using the 11900K, doing 6672 megahertz. 8,497 points, beating OGS by 3 points. Again, on the Z590 Dark. This time, single rank Samsung B die, because Cinebench doesn't really care that much about memory. Pushing very high memory frequency, though. We're looking at, 5260? Yeah, almost 5260 megabits per second, CL17. So not super tight, with an uncore frequency of 6.5 gigahertz, and again, the core doing 6670 megahertz. So, yeah, another very impressive, score from Senz here in 8-core Cinebench. Now let's move on to the next score, which is Ovis Hardware Labs Unigen Superposition 1080p Extreme Triple GPU top score, using 3 GTX 1080 Ti's on a Asus Rampage 6 Apex with a 10980XE at 5.2 gigahertz. Superposition isn't really much of a CPU benchmark. The 10980XE is here primarily because it's got a bunch of PCIe lanes, and unlike Threadripper, it doesn't tank your FPS. Threadripper is unfortunately really bad at GPU benchmarks, which is why you see a lot of people still running X299, even though Threadripper technically has more PCIe lanes. Also, because 1080 Ti's don't even actually do PCIe 4.0 anyway, so, Threadripper's PCIe 4.0-ness doesn't really help in that scenario. So congratulations to Ovis Hardware Lab on, getting, 3 1080 Ti's together, and I'm assuming they're water-cooled. Yep, chilled water cooling. And maxing out Unigen Superposition with that. I don't believe, previously this benchmark's been dominated by 290Xs, and man, those 1080 Ti's. Absolutely. I was wondering why people were running this, weren't running this on 3 1080 Ti's. I guess the main issue is that, the thing is, there's a bunch of rules about SLI not working on motherboards that don't have a bajillion PCIe lanes. Congratulations to Ovis Hardware Labs on that. I can actually compete with this, because I do have 3 1080 Ti's, and they should all work. I just need to fix one of them. Anyway, cool score, so congratulations to Ovis Hardware Labs on that. Next, Ovis Hardware Labs also ran quad GPU Superposition 1080p Extreme with 4 1080 Ti's. Honestly, I would not be surprised if these two setups were physically the same, because the Rampage 6 Apex does have these very convenient switches on the motherboard to disable the PCIe slots. So, I mean, technically you could probably disable the 4th GPU in software, But if you didn't feel like messing around with the software, you could always just, disable the PCIe slot with the 4th GPU and then go down from the quad GPU setup to the triple GPU setup. And yeah, here we actually have a lot more competition in the quad 1080 Ti space, which is very interesting because why all these people with quad 1080 Ti's don't run triple GPU? I have no idea. Yeah, but yeah. So Ova's Hardware Lab now has both triple and quad GPU Unigine superposition 1080p extreme top scores, and so congratulations to, I'm assuming, him on that, though maybe it's a team, I'm not sure. Either way, impressive multi-GPU setups here for Unigine superposition 1080p extreme. Somebody needs to run this on LN2 in my opinion, especially since 1080 Ti's are actually really, if you have 4 good 1080 Ti's and you can keep the thermal paste together all the way to full pot, super easy cards to run. Super easy. You don't, because they do full pot. You don't have to worry about, temperature control on these. Anyway, next global first place, we've got Forks with his Y-Cruncher Pi 1 billion top score on a 64-core CPU, using, of course, the 3990X, because there's not really that many 64-core CPUs out there, doing 4.275 gigahertz, and running quad-channel dual-rank Samsung B-Die at 3800 CL14 on a ROG Zenith 2 Extreme Alpha. And honestly, I'm kind of surprised that, I guess with the Threadripper memory controller, you're probably not going to clock that any higher anyway. So, because the thing is, I'm pretty sure Y-Cruncher is primarily memory bandwidth starved, and so technically Gear 2 wouldn't necessarily completely screw you over. The 2-to-1 memory ratio wouldn't completely screw you over on Threadripper for Y-Cruncher. And still, a impressive score here with the 3990X. Not a lot of competition in this, which is kind of surprising because I think quite a few people have run the 3990X in Cinebench, and so it's kind of surprising that not many people have run it for Y-Cruncher, because, yeah, there's basically just 2 people that have run, 2 people that have run the 3990X, and then there's, a bunch of, Opterons and Epics, and actually, is there even a bunch of Opterons? I think, no, there's one Opteron. Oh, man, the progress between that and this. Literally so much progress. Anyway, let's move on to the next score, which is again from Forks. This time he got his hands on real server hardware in the form of 4 Intel Xeon Platinum 8280s in a Dell server system. I guess a rack? I don't really pay much attention to server hardware. I guess this is called a rack. So yeah, in a Dell rack server, and yeah, this ran Y-Cruncher. This calculated 1 billion digits of pi using Y-Cruncher in 8.5 seconds, which is very, very fast. So yeah, and that's 112 CPU cores. So an impressive score from Forks there. Though mostly it just comes down to, can you source one of these CPUs? Because, yeah, the thing is, Y-Cruncher loves cores, it loves memory bandwidth, and I think this technically ends up being 12 memory channels, because each CPU has a 6-channel memory controller. Somebody needs to run this on one of the octa-channel epic dual epic system. Yeah, actually that would be 16-channel dual epic. Yeah, that might actually... I wonder how that would compare. You'd also have more CPU cores to throw around. Wait a minute. Is this not... It says quad CPU. Oh, boy. Where's the other 4 CPUs, though? I mean, the other 2... Well, whatever. I don't know enough about server hardware. Either way, crazy score, crazy system. Or more well... Actually, not really. I'd assume there's data centers where this is sort of they have racks and racks and racks of those. So, not actually that weird. Just unusual to see it benchmarked like this. So, yeah, anyway. And now we get into the fun scores, in my opinion. Where we get the wacky hardware setups, like dual RTX 3090s on LN2, along with a Xeon W3175X, to get the world record in 3D Mark TimeSpy Extreme. And this was done by Lumi, producing 24,000 Lumi in collaboration with Joe Cott. So yeah, this was like a two-man effort. Kingpin Kingpin Edition 3090s, Kingpin cooling LN2 pots on everything, an EVGA SR3 Dark motherboard, running Penta channel because the memory controller, like the high channel count memory controllers are terrible when it comes to initializing memory at high speeds. Like if you're just running JDEC, they're fine, but as soon as you start trying to push them, the memory controller just hates initializing all of the memory channels, so you end up in situations like having 5 memory channels working instead of, 6, which is what you'd want. Dual rank Samsung B-Die for this, but not being pushed super hard because, again, the memory controller on these CPUs is just freaking... Like, X299 memory controllers are not really that fun. With the W3175X, it must be so much worse because there's 2 more memory channels than what X299 has, and X299 is already kind of a pain. Yeah, 3090s... absolutely, well, for an SLI setup, absolutely screaming at 2.5 gigahertz. And 1431 on the memory. And the crazy thing is, like, this is not really a super, well, specifically for TimeSpy Extreme, this is kind of common, but TimeSpy Extreme is, like, the thing is, you don't see the W3175X used for many benchmarks because it's a 28-core CPU. And so, like, Firestrike only scales up to 32 threads. TimeSpy only scales up to 16. And like Vantage only scales up to 16 threads. 3D Mark 11 only scales up to 32 threads. 3D Mark 11 also runs at such high FPS that it tends to be CPU bottleneck these days. So, you don't really see the W3175X used in a bunch of like top scores because it's just kind of bad at most benchmarks. It's kind of similar to how Threadripper is only really... actually, Threadripper is technically good at TimeSpy Extreme, but it's still worse than the W3175X, which is why, we're seeing this right here. And actually, all of the top scores are done with W3175Xs. And yeah, so this is just kind of this is a really one-trick CPU. And I'd argue in competitive benchmarking, the Threadrippers are also kind of one-trick CPUs, where it's like, oh, they're good at TimeSpy Extreme and Cinebench. And not really anything else. So the 3175X kind of suffers from the same thing, though less so because it doesn't tank your GPU performance. So, yeah, but, not a CPU you see used very frequently, and even here in TimeSpy Extreme, which technically is a benchmark that's supposed to support up to, like, crazy numbers of threads, they're running it with just 28 cores and 28 threads. So I imagine the benchmark doesn't actually scale that great to the really insanely high thread counts. Yeah. And here's the actual setup. There's 2 2,000 watt power supplies for this, with another power supply dealing with heating the... I believe there's a heater on the CPU, and there's a heater... Well, they have a hairdryer heating the back of the one of the 3090s. I imagine there's a hot plate on one of the other 3090 because, or like a heater plate on the other 3090. Because the problem with 3090s is while it's great that you can cool down the core and then the core goes really fast, the memory when it gets cold actually gets way worse. So with 3090s, the challenge is basically keep the core cold, keep the memory warm. And when I say warm, I mean you need to keep the memory at like 20 degrees Celsius. Like you really can't let it go sub-zero if you want the memory to clock properly. So that's sort of the main struggle with these 3090s is just like... Because the thing is, if you run most cards on LN2, if you don't do anything, the entire PCB is going to very quickly end up covered in ice as the LN2, the LN2 pot just sucks all the heat out of the PCB, like it's, out of the core, and then it starts pulling it through the BGA and out of the PCB, and if you let that go on long enough, eventually you even end up with like your motherboard PCIe slot freezing up, and just everything gets turned to, everything starts losing heat to the LN2 pot. So you need to have things like a hairdryer in place to keep the system, to keep the memory at a temperature that it, works properly at. And so that's really really fiddly. And then of course on the 3090s, you need to make sure that like the thermal paste is holding up. And then the CPU is also like partially thermal paste issues because I do believe the 3175X is not soldered. It has regular like Intel toothpaste under it, so that needs to get replaced. Also, the 3175X has a cold bug, so you can't just like, you can't just fill up the LN2 pot and call it a day. You actually need to control the temperature, and with 28 cores, that's going to be very difficult because that puts out a lot of heat. And pulls a ton of power, which is why we have the two 2,000 watt power supplies here. And so, yeah, like this, like, I wish these kinds of setups were more common. Like, because this is kind of what made me really interested in in GPU benching, is when I got into overclocking at the time, you'd see crazy like quad 780 Ti, quad 290X, quad 980 Ti, quad Titan, SLI setups. And like, and some of those setups you'd need a power supply per GPU because especially something like the 980 Ti, like one 980 Ti is perfectly capable of overloading a 1,000 watt power supply when on LN2. And yeah, so this right here is just like, yay, big multi-GPU setup, or about as big a multi-GPU setup as you could have these days. And also, like, because of the insane power consumption and the fact that you really need to control the temperature on, like, the CPU. And I'm not sure about the GPUs. I guess it depends on how much you want to fight them, right? Like, I'm guessing they're kind of holding these. Like, personally, I probably wouldn't take this all. I wouldn't be trying to run this all the way to full pot, because as far as I know, 3090s do work at full pot, but the main issue is, like, getting them there with the thermal paste intact. So, arguably you would maybe want to run at like minus 100 initially just because that would be a lot easier. And I'm not sure that you would be able to hit those kinds of clocks at that kind of temperature, but yeah, like this is the kind of setup that's just an absolute handful to run. Because you've got 3 LN2 pots to manage, some very fiddly hardware that pulls a ton of power, and just, yeah, and then just an insane setup. Really, really cool score from Lumi and HWbot here, on Time Spy Extreme. And also Lumi made a video about this setup, so I'll hopefully remember to either link his channel or link the video about this score in the description or maybe in the comments. We'll see wherever I happen to remember to put it. So yeah, congratulations to Lumi on the 3D Mark Time Spy Extreme, because like, this is just such an awesome setup. Like, I miss the days of big 4,000 watt LN2 builds. Just like, yeah, because this, like, with the quad GPU setups, this was actually a semi-regular thing. Like, if you wanted to run quad GPU on LN2, this was kind of a necessity. Because one GPU, even on like water cooling, is quite easy to get up into the 500 watt range, and on LN2, just, yeah, absolutely insane at levels of power draw would be possible. Though now we have 3090s, which pull 1,000 watts, one card, like, individually. It would be really cool to see the average power, like have power monitoring specifically for the cards, to see how much power they're pulling, each of them is pulling from the PSUs. But yeah, so awesome score from Lumi and HWbot here. Congratulations to them on that. And let's move on to the next score, which is Niels. I've butchered that pronunciation. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm gonna go with Niels. Yeah, whatever. I give up. Geekbench 3 multicore. So this is a 4th place score on the 5300G, but I wanted to include this score because, as far as I know, this is the first run of the Z590 Dark on LN2, at least on HWbot. So, I wanted to include this because we're finally getting to see the X570 Dark, not Z590 Dark. It's weird to say X570 Dark. EVGA doesn't make AMD motherboards, or at least hasn't for a very, very long time. But yeah, so X570 Dark, 5300G on LN2, doing 5000 CL16 on the memory, which is, yeah, quite the memory overclock there. And it looks like that's synchronized with the Infinity Fabric, so that is insane. Um, but yeah, 5.4 gigahertz on the 5300G, and like fourth place in quad core Geekbench 3. It's like that's a very competitive ranking right now, right? Like you've got Safe Disk at the top with a almost 5.7 gigahertz CPU, and Splave with a 5.5. And like a big part of this especially at the top end is like you need to bin CPUs. Um, so yeah, but it's just interesting to already see the X570 Dark in action on LN2 and seeing some uh, like a pretty solid score from it right here, right? Like for the 5300G specifically, I've not seen that many 5300G scores so far, but yeah, still a very very solid score, and hopefully we'll see more action from the X570 Dark. And if somebody's gonna put a comment about, why don't I have an X570 Dark? Well, I just don't. I've already asked EVGA about it. We're still waiting for that to turn up. But yeah, so I wanted to include this score because it's just cool to see more variety in the top end motherboards. Because for a while it's been, I think, like I'm guessing Noms is on a Hero, isn't he? Oh no, he's on an Impact. There's unfortunately not that much variety in the top score for like top scores and the Ryzen motherboards being used. So yeah, it's sort of cool to see a new challenger in the form of the X570 Dark. Um, anyway, next score we've got Salty Croissant, and in what is this? Getting third place in Quad GPU 3D Mark Vantage Extreme with two Ares 3 R9 295X2s. And these are like, they're Ares 3s. Like, like literally these cards are why this made it into the score. Like, so the regular 295X2 has a 4-phase V-Core VRM. These have a 6-phase V-Core VRM. Also, these use 60 amp power stages, if I'm not mistaken. Like, man, like I miss multi-GPU. I don't miss how horrible it was outside of benchmarks, but if games ran multi-GPU like benchmarks ran multi-GPU, the world would have been so much cool. Like I think hardware would have been so much cooler. But unfortunately, most game developers have better things to do than optimize, their games to run on 1%, 1% of population setups. So, because that was the main issue, is like, why would you optimize for quad GPU setups when nobody runs them? And so consequently, everything except for benchmarks didn't really work very well if you had 4 GPUs, or even 3. And even 2 GPUs in a lot of situations wouldn't really work properly. So, yeah, anyway, these cards actually come, with water blocks from the factory. I think this might be one of the first cards to come with a, like, full custom, like a proper full cover water block from the factory. Oh yeah, triple 8-pin power connectors, but these days that's kind of normal. Back then wasn't really that insane. There was other cards, like Power Color had some triple 8-pin power. Actually, I think the original Ares might have been triple 8 pins as well. So yeah, this, like, at the time this was kind of rare. These days with the 3090s, everybody's got triple 8 pins, like, because the 3090, well, actually, one of these is perfectly capable of pulling more power than one 3090 on water cooling. Because individually, each of those 290X cores is perfectly capable of pulling 400 watts. So that makes these cards fun. And that brings us to Salty Croissant's power meter, which he overloaded. And in fact, in the comments down here, I believe, yeah, he's tripping his housebreaker. Yeah, because he's in Canada, and they have I believe 110 volts or something like that. So yeah, his house was not happy with the quad 290X setup, or quad Hawaii setup is the better way to put it. Yeah, because both cards can do 1260, but like at 1260, each of those cards has to each of those cores has to be pulling around 500 watts, with peaks exceeding that. So yeah, I'm not surprised he tripped his breaker. And that's even with a really quite, power efficient CPU like the 5900X, and it's just like, well, quad 295X2s, man, like, they just pull insane amounts of power. I'm surprised that the memory. Oh, I guess pushing the memory would not help. Lower clock volt. Yeah, because GT2 was tripping. Like, yep. Quad crossfire. Um, I'm surprised it didn't trip out his power supply. Oh, I guess he does have a 2,000 watt power supply, doesn't he? Yeah. Um, so, yeah, and this is Vantage Extreme, so, you know, with the 5900X, you actually want to run it with 12 cores and 12 threads, because Vantage really doesn't know what to do if the CPU has more than 16 threads. So with a 5900X, you have to run 12 cores, 12 threads. If you had a 5950X, you'd run 1616. Yeah, solid GPU score there. Though I wonder, like, the quad GPU setups generally have really high, like, CPU overhead. So this is one of those setups where I wonder if this might not run better with a 10900K. And you could actually run this on a 10900K, right? Because this is, like, even here on Ryzen, like, this is technically... So this right here is exactly why that theoretical Ryzen... my perfect theoretical Ryzen motherboard idea is a thing. Because this technically is only... PCIe 3.0 X8 to each of the GPU. It's not even that, because so each card has its own PLX chip, right? Like that's that big silver chip right over there. That's the PLX chip. That's an 8747 if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, that takes 16 PCIe lines from the CPU, or in this case 8, because we're on a 5900X, and the 5900X only has 16 lanes total available for the GPUs. So each card gets 8 lanes, and then splits it through the PLX chip between the two cores. So effectively, you're running on like almost X4, right? Like, not really. The PLX chip can add some smarts to the bandwidth sharing, but ultimately, like, yeah, you don't have a lot of bandwidth to go around between all of the cores, and it runs fine. It's getting, like, top 3. So you could totally run this on a 10900K, which would potentially improve the FPS, because the 10900K does have more single thread, like, well... Actually, I think you'd probably want 10900K on LN2 for this. Compared to the 5900X. On ambient, the 5900X might not be that far behind. I'm not sure. The funny thing is, like, some benchmarks also just favor the Intel architecture over the AMD architecture when it comes to FPS. Yeah, just awesome, like, really cool to see these GPUs in action. Sucks that you couldn't push them to the limit. At the same time. Like, individually, sure, but not both. And also what you can do with AMD cards is you can actually run different core clocks on each core, though I'm not sure on a quad GPU setup, I don't think that would be too effective. On dual GPU, it can actually be, like, worth your time, but on a quad GPU setup, micro-optimizing each card is probably just a waste of time. Because the thing is, if you turn off the frame pacing, right, Crossfire is perfectly happy to just... throw frames out with no pacing whatsoever. So you get a bunch of micro stuttering and it's just horrible, and, you know, for games, terrible. But if you're running benchmarks, we don't care about the quality of the frames, we just care about how many frames you can produce in a given amount of time. Which is also why, like, if your card is artifacting all over the place, that's also tolerated, because, hey, it finished the benchmark, right? As long as it doesn't crash, it counts. And so, yeah, this is just an insane setup with those 5950Xs, and this is on chilled water cooling. Though the chiller, like, you know, I'm a guess it does help, because like the big GPU cores basically always scale with temperature. So it'll reduce how much voltage you need to hit a clock like 1180. And, you know, in Salty's case, that's probably pretty important considering he's tripping his house's breaker. Though I wonder if he has the chiller on the same breaker as he has the cards. You know, that might be an optimization worth trying. Like, put the chiller on a different circuit so that you only... Actually, if you had a multi-power supply setup, you could have each power supply connected to a different breaker. So that each card would individually have, yeah, you could totally do that. That's totally doable. You should try that. If he can get more, like, basically you'd need like a 1300 watt power supply per GPU, I think. No, you could probably get away with 1000. The thing is, the 5950X really doesn't pull much power. I mean, 5900X here, like, it doesn't pull much power. Like, that's going to be like a maybe 200 watt peak power draw from the CPU. And so the CPU is absolutely dwarfed by the power consumption of the GPUs. And so, yeah, that's kind of the thing, is just like, these cards, you know, easily capable of pulling like close to actually, he's probably hitting close to 1000 watt peak on each of the cards during GT2. Also, if you had a CPU that made the, like, I really think this is probably starting to bottleneck on the CPU a bit. If you had a CPU that reduces the bottleneck, the power draw would go up even higher. So yeah, this is just an insane setup right here. Yeah, I'm like, good. Like, first of all, congratulations to Salty on finding a pair of Ares 3 cards, because these are very rare. I believe there's only 1,000 of them. Like, there's really not that many of them. Yeah, like, awesome cards. Like, absolutely awesome cards. It's a shame that they're limited editions. So congratulations to him on the 3D Mark Vantage Extreme top score, and let's move on to the next score, which is Kubi's Unigine Heaven Extreme top score on dual GTX 580. Unigine Heaven Extreme top score for dual GTX 580s. And so 4,783 DirectX 11 marks, because Unigine Heaven Extreme is DirectX 11. Cards running 1200 core and 1313 on the memory. On LN2, you know, two-way SLI setup, with an i9 9900K, which is totally like that. The thing is, Unigine Heaven basically only needs like 4 core. He's running it on 2 cores. Oh, wait, what? I thought you didn't need, what? I thought it was optimal to run it on quad. I didn't think it would bottleneck at these kinds of speeds. I guess I underestimated how slow a 5960X is. Or it's one of those benchmarks that does that thing where if you have too many cores, it slows down. Which it might be doing with a 5960X. Yeah, so that is very interesting. So Kubi's is running 2 cores, 2 threads, 5.4 gigahertz. So that 9900K is actually kind of chilling. Like, honestly, there's 7700Ks that'll do 5.4 gigahertz if you only have 2 cores. Actually, they'll do 5.4 even on 4 cores. So this is actually a very chill overclock. Because you only have 2 cores enabled, so it's not going to pull a ton of power, because there's, like, most of the chip isn't running, right? Yeah, the 2 cores that are running really hard, but it's just 2 of them. And then on the memory, we're looking at 3733 CL12. Yeah, so that is some very impressive efficiency, but I would have figured that 2 GTX 580s are too slow to need a 5.4 gigahertz Skylake architecture. Because, like, technically, yes, I know it's called a Coffee Lake, but it uses Skylake cores. Right, like, the 7740X is basically the same cores, but here we have a 7740X running 4 cores, 8 threads, 5.5 gigahertz, much worse memory settings. Oh, I wonder if that's doing it. Well, also the GPUs are clocked way lower, but that's like, the thing is, Gunslinger is beating Splave, and Splave definitely has like a massive GPU clock advantage. So that is very interesting, because I would have figured, because like, I've benched Unigine Heaven Extreme in the past quite a bit, and admittedly mostly on AMD GPUs, not actually, probably only on AMD GPUs now that I think of it. And I always, like, and my experience was that basically up to like 6,000 points, it didn't really care about your CPU too much, as long as you didn't have like an FX 8350 or something. And then past that point, you just needed more and more and more CPU clock. Like, if you wanted 9,000 points, you needed basically a 6.6 gigahertz chip at that point. So Yeah, that is very interesting because I figured this was such a low score that you shouldn't need a ton of CPU performance. Um, but though this is also on Windows 8.1, whereas Gunslinger is on Windows 7. And I have, so maybe like this is great efficiency from Kubi's here. And also, like, I'm a big fan of the, SLI on LN2. Heck yeah. Actually, this might be dry ice. Oh no, it's liquid nitrogen. They don't. The thing is, these are GTX 580s, so you can't expect them to clock super high. And also, are those reference PCBs? This one in front looks suspicious. This one's really, the one in the back is tall, but the front one looks kind of short. So I'm guessing that's a reference card. And yeah, I guess you wouldn't really want to hammer one of those. Because reference NVIDIA PCBs tend to not have great track record when it comes to raising core voltage a lot. So, yeah, but this is just like very impressive efficiency from Kubi's here, and then also he's just running it on liquid nitrogen. So it's like it's cool to see a score where, like he's not just brute forcing the score with the clocks of the cards on liquid nitrogen. This is just also insanely efficient. Like he is beating second place by, over 200 points, which is like that's a lot. That's a really big improvement when we're talking about a benchmark that's, under five, like overall score is under 5,000 points. Like that's a huge gap. So that's really impressive from Kubi's here. And yeah, and also I'm just a big fan of multi-GPU setups, which I think we're all very much aware of at this point. This is the perfect, like, multi-GPU, very big multi-GPU, more multi-GPU. Anyway, so yeah, congratulations to Kubi's on, like, nailing his OS for Unigine Heaven with dual GTX 580s. At least that's what it looks like to me. Then again, I've, not much experience with NVIDIA SLI on Unigine Heaven. So, yeah, anyway, next score. We've got Tags 3D Mark 03 on an ATI Radeon 9200/9250. And that alone is like, I am confused as to what is going on with that. Yeah, so the crazy thing is this is actually a very popular GPU, even though it's freaking ancient. Yeah. Like, look at this. Wait, I am trying to identify the VRM, and I am having a very hard time. Does this only use linear regulators? No way. No, there's gotta be a... Like, what are the... Those are diodes, right? Yeah, those are diodes. And is that a MOSFET, maybe? I have no idea what's going on. There's no inductor. This can't... Like, this might actually only use linear regulators, then. Or maybe there's, like, an in-PCB inductor. But that, like, like, it would have to pull so little power for that to be the case. I am very confused. So, ancient, AGP, like, AGP, I've heard of this. I think I've seen this. But at the time that I've seen an AGP slot, I was too young to understand what an AGP slot is. So, yeah, that's fun. Running on an Intel Core 2 Duo E8600 here for tag. I'm getting 1,364 points in 3D Mark 03. Running at 7 FPS. Wait, what? How does the first test run at 94 FPS and the rest of the benchmark is a freaking slideshow? Well, okay, that's what it's doing. So yeah, 7.4 FPS on GT2 and 8.6 on GT3. Apparently do you not run GT4 on these? Really? I don't bench 3D Mark 03 very much, and also this is ancient, so I have no idea. I guess you don't run the GT4. Anyway, the other reason I pulled up the score, like, the interesting thing is you'd think this ancient GPU that goes into an AGP ATEX slot, not much competition, right? So Tag here in 2021 must be one of the few people to bench this, but actually, in 2019 is the last time somebody posted a top score for one of these. Go back even further, it was 2015. So this thing gets like a surprising amount of action for like what it is. Oh, we finally have a picture of the back of it. So it does have a buck converter, but where's the inductor? It has to, I guess the inductor's in the PCB. Also, what the hell are... Wait. This is a different PCB, isn't it? I am very confused. This one doesn't even have the freaking diodes. It's got jumpers over there. Like, yeah, it's not even... I am so confused. I'm so confused. But that's also why, like, I decided to include this in this week's roundup, because this is the kind, well, super weird hardware, or more like just super old. I don't know if it's weird because it's too old for me to know if this was like, is this a common GPU? I have no idea. I've never seen one of these until I was scrolling through the list of hardware, and I was like, I've never heard of this. What is it? And then, yeah, Tag decided to run it on phase change, which I think previously was sort of the norm. Oh no, this is like some bizarro water cooling abomination. Yes. That's exactly what it is. Yeah, but Tag decided to run it on phase change, and apparently, is that memory speed, or is that like, that's memory speed, right? Yeah. Allowed him to push the memory speed higher than, I guess, everybody else. Well, yeah, max, like, push the core pretty far, but really push the memory. And consequently, take the top score for 3D Mark 03 with this card by a pretty significant margin again, right? Like, that's like 100 points there, going from 1254 to 1364. So yeah, and then other than that, like, the CPU runs DDR2. I don't know what motherboard is this. I don't even know who makes this. I have no idea what's going on. This way too old. This is way too old. So yeah. Anyway, this is a thing. People bench this. Probably pretty fun if you know what's going on with it. I have no idea. But the thing is, I will say, like, low power hardware is fun. Wait, this card doesn't come with a heatsink, does it? Like, this isn't designed to... Yeah, because he's, like, C-clamping the thing on. I'm assuming there's no heatsink mounting holes. This is from back in the day when GPUs didn't need heatsinks yet. I am so confused. Still, an impressive score from Tag here, so congratulations to him on that, and let's move on to the last score of this week's roundup, which is McCulty's 3D Mark 11 performance top score on the Radeon HD 7750. Now this I do understand. 7000 series is my favorite series of AMD GPUs. Actually, more like, I like all of the 28 nanometer AMD GPUs except for Fiji, because they disabled HBM overclocking on Fiji. And yes, I will bring that up at every opportunity I get. But anyway, HD 7750. Fun card. McCulty's got a pretty unique one. So Sapphire made a fully passive version of the HD 7750, and that's what we're looking at here, which is why we have these massive heatsinks. But of course... all heats, like, you know, sure, the heatsink might have been designed for passive operation, but if you just shove some more air into it, it'll work a hell of a lot better. And so we've got this. That's actually a really neat way of getting those two fans. Like, instead of zip tying them directly to the card, they seem to be attached to the PCIe slots, perhaps. I'm not entirely, I guess, attached to the PCIe slots, which, yeah, pretty neat. Honestly, if you're into, like, deshroud, like, if you have a card with, like, dead fans, having some kind of bracket to attach the fans to the PCIe slots, though you'd probably want the fans to have some kind of shroud to be more, like, because this is a passive heatsink, so the fin stack's relatively open, but if you had, like, a active heatsink design, then you'd probably want to mash the fans up against the, like, get the fans closer to the fin stack than this. Then again, the 7750 also just doesn't really pull any power, because... This card, if I remember correctly, these are like sub 100 watt GPUs. They clock really high, but they are kind of wacky in that if you keep raising the core voltage on them, the core clock keeps going up, but the memory clock actually hits a limit pretty early. Though none of that is going on here because Mikulti, I believe, decided to keep the card stock, so like no mods. Unfortunately, the software voltage control on these is not great in my experience. But yeah, 1310 on the core, 1400 on the memory. 5950X doing 4.8 gigahertz. It's kind of 29,000 physics with... Why would you do... Oh, I guess maybe to boost the graphics score? Yeah, I guess probably to boost the graphics score. Because 12 was running actually 1300, but way lower memory clock. Yeah, that's the hard part with the 750s. Actually, what card is this? And this is on phase change. Yeah, so these cards are like kind of like these are fun, but they're kind of fiddly to run. And Mick's card seems to be really good, considering that he's getting like 1310, 1400 on. I'm assuming actually no, that's 1.4 volts. I guess 3D Mark 11 doesn't care that much about memory clock, because there's certainly other benchmarks. Then again, the 7750 has a lot less cores than the 7770, so I guess that would be part of it as well. Like the 7770, which is technically the same chip, just different configuration, has a real problem of running out of memory bandwidth if you push the core clock too far. So, yeah, and I believe Mick actually did he did a live stream with overclocking this card. Maybe even 2 live streams. Maybe I'll remember to link to those as well as the video from Lumi. So, yeah, I just think HD 7750s are awesome. You can mod the memory timings on them. You can, I wonder if, I'm assuming Mick did that. He should know how to do that. Yeah, you can mod the memory timings on these. You can mod the memory, like core voltage, memory controller voltage is very important if you're planning to push the core voltage really high. You want to have memory controller voltage control, or your memory clock starts declining as as you start pushing, as you keep pushing the core voltage. And other than that, we've got a ASRock X570 Tai Chi, dual rank Samsung B die running 141313 at 3733. I'm assuming that's like daily memory settings and probably gear down mode on the command rate there. I'm not certain that that would be true 1T command rate. And yeah, solid score for the HD 7750, which definitely, like, this is the kind of card that I think, if you want to practice volt modding, these are super fun. These are awesome, because all of the voltage controller, well, I guess the main controller isn't that convenient, but the other controllers are. Like, the minor rail controllers are huge, 8-pin chips, super easy to mod. So, yeah, and you should have a decent amount of software voltage control on some of these cards. So, cool cards to check out, and that's why that gets into this week's roundup as well. And yeah, that's it for this week's HWbot score roundup, or more like these last 2 weeks HWbot score roundup. Hopefully you like the new format. I certainly like it. It managed to make the video a lot shorter, and I didn't have to spend a bunch of time talking about how 11900Ks are very good at SuperPi, because that's just a fact. There's not really much else to it. But yeah, so that's it for the video. So thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. There's a link to that down in the description below. There's also the AHOC Teespring store where you can pick up shirts, stickers, posters, the usual YouTuber merch. Both Patreon and Teespring help out immensely with running the channel, so it would be much appreciated if you check them out. Yeah, that's it for the video. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.